My mother called on a Wednesday morning, and by the time she finished talking, I knew my brother had made the worst mistake of his life. My name is John Richter. I'm 54 years old. I live in Stuttgart, a 2-hour drive from my mother's house in Freiburg. I spent 26 years as a contract auditor, which means I've made a career out of finding the numbers people hoped nobody would notice. Small discrepancies, quiet patterns. The kind of thing that looks like nothing until you add it all up, and suddenly it's everything. I tell you this because it matters later. Welcome back to Father's Revenge Stories. Pull up a chair. Pour yourself something. The people in these stories were given something most people want, a family that loved them, and they chose not to. Leave a comment, subscribe if this is your first time here. If you've been here before, thank you for coming back. It was Wednesday, just past 9 in the morning. My mother, Renata Richter, 71 years old, still in the same house on Lindenstrasse in Freiburg, where my brother Max and I grew up, called me out of nowhere. No hello, no comment about the weather or my back. Just my name, dropped flat and careful, the way she used to say it when I was 16 and about to do something I couldn't take back. John. Hey, Mama. I turned the burner off. What's wrong? Did Thomas's wedding already happen? I set my mug down slowly. Thomas. My nephew. Max and Lena's son, 23 years old, engaged to Sophie for 2 years. I had been waiting for an invitation. I assumed my mother had too. She had watched that boy grow up. She had taught him card games and chased him around her garden, and attended every school concert he had ever performed in, including the recorder recital of 2009, which nobody who was present has fully recovered from. She had earned an invitation. Yeah, I said. I think it was last Saturday. Why? Nobody called you either? The word either landed like a stone in still water. I called Max this morning, she said, to ask. Lena answered. She laughed and said, Oh, Renata, the wedding was last Saturday. Just like that. I didn't say anything for a moment. She laughed, my mother repeated quietly, like I had asked about something that didn't concern me. I didn't know it yet, but that laugh was going to be the most expensive sound Lena had ever made. I called Max before I was off the phone with my mother. He picked up fast. Too fast. The way guilty people answer when they've been expecting the call and rehearsed the opening line. Max, why wasn't Mama at Thomas's wedding? Silence. The specific silence of a man running calculations. John, it was small. Just immediate family, close friends. You know how these things... She's his grandmother, I said. She lives 20 minutes from the venue. I know, but Lena handled the guest list and then I heard it. Lena's voice in the background. Not the words, just the tone. Low, pointed, coaching him through a headset like a lawyer whispering to a witness on the stand. That was when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. We'll come by, Max said finally. Next week. We want to explain in person. Max. John, please. He hung up. I stood in my Stuttgart kitchen with cold coffee and the dawning feeling that this had nothing to do with a wedding guest list. I called my mother back. They're coming next week, I told her. Max and Lena. They want to explain in person. That sound. The one that means she already knows the end of the story and is waiting to see if I'll catch up. Mama, what aren't you telling me? A pause long enough to park a truck in. Frau Becker from the parish, she said, was at the wedding. She called me Sunday to say what a lovely ceremony it had been. She mentioned meeting a very pleasant man, a financial advisor, she thought. He had a leather portfolio. The floor shifted. A financial advisor. At a wedding reception, with a leather portfolio. Frau Becker said they all went inside for about an hour, my mother continued. The younger guests stayed on the terrace. When they came back out, Max looked like he had been told difficult news. Lena looked like she had been told very good news. I didn't speak for a moment. Mama. I kept my voice level. You know what I have to ask. Yes. Are they moving on the house? The savings? Renate Richter had lived on Lindenstrasse for 40 years. My father had built carefully and quietly his entire working life. The kind of wealth that accumulates when you never show off and never stop saving. The house, the accounts, the small investments he had made over decades, none of it was dramatic. All of it was real. Nobody talked about it. It was simply there. The way the house was there. The way she was there. Assumed. Permanent. Until someone stopped assuming and started planning. "John," she said, "how well do you know Lena?" "Well enough." "Then you already know the answer." She was right. I did. I had never been able to name what bothered me about Lena. She was polished, always warm at the right moments, always said the correct thing at the correct volume. But there was something underneath it, a watchfulness that wasn't affection, a patience that wasn't calm. I had told myself I was being an overprotective brother, told myself Max was happy and that was enough. I had been lying to myself for years, and I had just run out of road. "I'm coming to Freiburg on Friday," I said. "I'll make Maultaschen," she said. "I'm not coming for the food, Mama." "I know," she said. "That's not what I meant." She hung up before I could ask what she did mean. I found out on Friday. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. 7 days. That's how long Max and Lena let the silence sit between the phone call and the meeting. 7 days of nothing except a single text from Max that said, "Still planning to come Sunday," with a period at the end. Not a question mark, not an apology, a period. The punctuation of a man who has been coached. I drove to Freiburg on Friday morning. 2 hours down the A5, radio low, rehearsing conversations I knew wouldn't go the way I rehearsed them. My mother opened the door before I reached it. Small, precise, wearing the navy cardigan she saves for occasions she considers significant. She had ironed it. I noticed that immediately. My mother irons things when she is preparing for something. She ironed her blouse the day we buried my father. She ironed the tablecloth the day the house was paid off. I followed her to the kitchen. Coffee was already made. We sat across from each other at the table where Max and I had done homework 30 years ago, where my father had read the newspaper every Sunday morning for 3 decades, where this family had conducted all of its most important business under the cover of ordinary meals. "Tell me," I said. She wrapped both hands around her mug and told me. Thomas and Sophie had married the previous Saturday. Small ceremony, Lena's family only. Her parents, her sister and brother-in-law. 2 cousins. Max had been there, of course, standing beside his wife at his own son's wedding in a venue that had no seat for the woman who had helped raise the groom. My mother had found out 8 days before the wedding, when Frau Becker mentioned the invitation she had seen on Lena's kitchen counter. My mother had said nothing to Max, had not called Thomas, had not confronted Lena. Instead, she had called a lawyer. I set down my coffee. "Who?" "His name is Mr. Hoffman. He handled the Mutter estate 2 years ago. Very thorough, very discreet." "Mama?" "When?" "The same day Frau Becker told me, 9 days ago." 9 days. While I was in Stuttgart thinking everything was fine, my mother had already been to see a lawyer. "Why?" I said. "What made you think you needed one?" She stood up, went to the counter, opened the second drawer, and placed a folder on the table. Inside were printed bank statements, certain figures circled in red pen. Small regular transfers out of her account going back 5 months. Amounts modest enough to stay below any threshold that would trigger concern. 200 euros here, 250 there. I looked up. "Someone had access to your account?" Lena offered to help me with online banking after my knee surgery last spring. I gave her access because she offered, and I trusted her. She paused. I stopped trusting her in January. What happened in January? A man came to the house. Max brought him, introduced him as a colleague. He asked questions about the property, whether I had updated my will recently, whether anyone assisted me with my finances, whether I had considered what would happen to the house when I was no longer able to manage things myself. She looked at me steadily. Mr. Hoffman confirmed he was a financial advisor Lena had retained privately. The kitchen was very quiet. They were already moving, I said, before the wedding. The wedding was not cruelty, she said. It was preparation. They wanted me emotional, destabilized, easier to manage. She picked up her coffee. It didn't work. I spent that Friday with my mother and Mr. Hoffman, who arrived at 10 with a briefcase and the focused calm of a man who had seen this precise situation before and found it neither surprising nor acceptable. Over 2 hours, the picture assembled itself clearly. Lena had transferred just over 3,000 euros from my mother's account across 5 months. Small enough to avoid drawing attention. Deliberate enough to be unmistakable once you knew to look. She had also obtained copies of the property deed, the pension statements, and my mother's original will, which listed Max as primary beneficiary of the Lindenstrasse house and the savings my father had built over 40 years of work. The plan was straightforward in the way that ugly things usually are. Destabilize Renata through exclusion. Use her distress as evidence of mental decline. File for guardianship. Take control of the finances. The house, the accounts, the pension, redirected through Max, who was either a willing architect or a man who had learned not to ask questions. I asked Mr. Hoffman what my mother had already done. He opened his briefcase and placed 3 documents on the table. Her accounts had been restructured, Lena's access revoked. A new account opened at a different institution. The 3,000 euros documented and flagged. The will had been rewritten. The house and primary savings now held in a trust with specific conditions attached. Max was not removed entirely, but nothing could be accessed while my mother was living without her direct instruction. And my mother had completed a full cognitive assessment at the Freiburg clinic. Dr. Brenner's report was 3 pages. The summary, which Mr. Hoffman read with the quiet satisfaction of a man delivering the right result, was that Renata Richter demonstrated cognitive function well above average for her age, with no indicators of any impairment whatsoever. He placed the report on top of the other documents. Anyone filing for guardianship, he said, will find this waiting for them. My mother said nothing. She had the expression of a woman who had known all of this already, and was simply allowing the rest of us to arrive. Max called Sunday evening. I was still in Freiburg. I let it ring. He called again at 8. I answered. "John." His voice had that rehearsed quality I remembered from childhood. The sound of a man reciting rather than speaking. I wanted to talk about the wedding. "I know you heard." "I heard quite a bit more than that," I said. "Tell me something, Max. Did you know about the transfers?" Silence. 3,000 euros, Max. 5 months. Mr. Hoffman has every transaction documented. The silence that followed was not the silence of a man who didn't know. It was the silence of a man who had chosen not to look too closely at something because looking would have required him to act. "We should meet," he said finally. "The 4 of us. Talk this through." I looked across the kitchen at my mother, who was watering the herbs on her windowsill with complete serenity. "I'll ask Mama," I said. "But understand something before you sit down at any table. Whatever you think you're walking into, you're not." He didn't answer. I said, "Max, when did you last speak to Thomas? Really speak to him?" Another silence. I hung up. My mother continued watering her herbs. "He's coming Sunday," I told her. "I know," she said. "I'll make Sauerbraten." She set 5 places at the table. I noticed immediately. "Mama? Who else is coming?" She stirred the pot. "Thomas called me Thursday. He saw the photos online and realized I wasn't in any of them. He called to apologize." "What did you tell him?" "That I wasn't angry at him, and I would very much like to see him." "Does he know why we're meeting?" She smiled at the stove. "I told him it was Sunday dinner," which it is. Thomas arrived first. 23 years old, still carrying the slightly dazed happiness of a recently married man, and underneath it, something more uncertain. The look of someone who had noticed things at his own wedding he hadn't been able to explain and hadn't yet found the right person to ask. He hugged my mother at the door for a long time. She let him. Max and Lena arrived 11 minutes later. Lena walked in composed, bright-eyed, with that careful smile I now understood completely. The smile of someone who is always counting exits. She looked at the table. She counted the settings. She saw Thomas. Something moved behind her eyes. Gone in an instant. We sat. My mother served dinner, passed the bread. Max talked about work the way people talk when they are performing normalcy over a fault line. Thomas was quieter than usual, watching his parents with the steady attention of a young man sitting on a question he hasn't yet asked. Lena ate precisely, said the right things, complimented the Sauerbraten, asked Sophie about the honeymoon. My mother let all of it happen. She ate. She listened. She refilled glasses. Then she set her fork down, folded her napkin, and placed it beside her plate with that small, quiet click I had heard once before at this table, right before she told me about Mr. Hoffman. The sound of a woman who is ready. She reached into the pocket of her navy cardigan and produced an envelope. She slid it across the table to Thomas. Thomas looked at it. "Grandma? Open it, sweetheart." He opened it, read it. His face changed the way faces change when numbers are larger than expected, when meaning is clearer than anticipated. He looked up. "This is a wedding gift," she said simply. "Your grandfather earned it. I saved it. It belongs in your future." "The account is in your name," I said. "Yours and Sophie's. Established Tuesday. Mr. Hoffman's office handled it. The transfer is already complete." Lena set her fork down. "I've also made changes to my affairs," my mother continued pleasantly. "The house, the savings, the arrangements your grandfather made, all restructured, filed and notarized as of Wednesday." She picked up her wine glass. "There is also a medical report from the Freiburg Clinic assessing my cognitive capacity. Dr. Brenner found nothing of concern. Mr. Hoffman has attached it to the estate filing." Max had gone completely still. "I also want to mention," she said, in exactly the tone she used to discuss the garden, "that I am aware of the account access, the transfers, the visit from the financial advisor in January." Thomas looked at his mother slowly. "What transfers?" he said. "What financial advisor?" Lena opened her mouth. "Thomas," my mother said gently, "ask your parents. I think it's time." What followed I will not describe in full. Some of it belongs to Thomas and his parents and the slow, necessary work of a young man realizing that his own wedding had been used as cover for something his grandmother was never supposed to survive intact. What I will tell you is that Thomas did not raise his voice. He asked one question, quiet and precise, the way people ask questions when they already know and only need to hear it confirmed. "You used my wedding," he said to Lena. "That's what you needed. Grandma upset. Grandma emotional. So you could say she wasn't managing properly." Lena tried. "It wasn't." He looked at his father. "Did you know?" Max looked at the tablecloth. The answer he didn't give was the most complete answer in the room. Thomas nodded once. The slow nod of a young man filing something permanently. Then he looked at my mother. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I didn't know." She put her hand over his. "I know you didn't. That's why you're sitting at this table." Max and Lena left at 8:30. No drama, no slammed doors. Just the quiet, deflated exit of two people who had arrived believing they still had options and discovered, one course at a time, that they did not. I watched Lena walk to the car, back straight. Whatever she was feeling, she was not going to let me see it. Max paused at the door. He looked at our mother for a long moment. She looked back at him without anger, without coldness, with the particular patience of a woman waiting for someone to become who she knows they can be. He said nothing. He left. Thomas stayed. He sat with my mother while I did the dishes, which has been my role at Sunday dinners since I was tall enough to reach the sink. I listened to them talk. "Grandma," Thomas said at one point, "did you know before the wedding that they were planning something?" She was quiet for a moment. "I suspected," she said. The man in January was not subtle, and Lena had been asking questions for months about the house, about the savings, about how these things work when someone can no longer manage them alone. She paused. "I can very much manage them alone. So you were already ready?" I was already ready. He was quiet. Then, "Does it still hurt, not being at my wedding?" She considered this the way she always considers things that deserve a real answer. "Yes," she said, "of course it does. I had imagined being there since you were 4 years old." She paused. "But I have learned that the things that hurt you and the things that defeat you do not have to be the same thing." Thomas walked out to his car at 9:15. I walked with him. Cold Freiburg evening. His breath clouded in the dark. "Grandpa John," he said, "I don't even know what to say about the account." "You don't have to say anything. Live well. That's the whole point." He nodded. "Is my dad going to be all right?" I looked at my nephew, this young man who had been used without his knowledge, who had sat through an entire Sunday dinner having his understanding of his own family rearranged, and who had not deflected or made it about himself. "Your father," I said, "made a serious mistake. Whether he made it knowingly or because he stopped asking questions he should have asked, that's between him and his conscience. Max is not a bad man. He is a man who let someone else do his thinking for him until the consequences became very large. That's recoverable, if he does the work." Thomas nodded slowly. "And my mom?" I looked at him. "That," I said, "is above my pay grade." He almost smiled. "Yeah." He looked back at the house. Kitchen window lit. My mother's silhouette moving through her clean kitchen. The same light, the same woman who had been there his entire life, quietly building something real while everyone assumed she was simply standing still. "She's something, isn't she?" he said. "She always has been," I told him. "We just keep forgetting." I drove back to Stuttgart on the empty A5 with the radio off, and the particular feeling of a man who has watched something be made right without a single punch thrown. It's quieter than you expect. Less explosion. More resolution. The specific exhale of watching someone underestimate the wrong person and live with the result. My mother called the next morning at 7:30. "The Sauerbraten came out well," she said. "It was excellent, Mama. I'm thinking of repainting the kitchen. Your father always said the yellow was too much. Probably was. I might plant more tomatoes this year. I have the time now that I'm not spending every other weekend managing other people's problems." I smiled at the ceiling. "Mama, do you think Max will come around?" She was quiet the way she is quiet when she is being honest rather than hopeful. "I think," she said, "that Max will have to decide who he is now that the comfortable version of things is no longer available to him. That is a hard thing, but I have seen harder things done. And if he doesn't, then he doesn't. I have my house. I have my garden. I have Thomas, who called this morning to say thank you. I have you, who drove 2 hours on a Friday without being asked." She paused. "I have enough, John. I have more than enough." I said goodbye. I sat for a while in the quiet of my apartment, thinking about my father, who had worked 40 years without talking about what he was building, who had simply built it and left it to a woman he trusted completely to know what it was for. He knew exactly who he was leaving it to. So did she. Some people build things to prove something. My mother built hers to protect something. And when the people who wanted to take it finally showed their hand, she was already gone from the table. She was already home. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this family.